Hey YouTube, in this video we're going to be doing a tier list video just like I did 2 years ago for the launch of the X670E. So today we're going to be doing the same exact thing, only this time it is for the newly released X870E motherboard. So this is more of the premium, this is the dual chipset. So we are only going to be going over all the X870E motherboards that have launched. The additional ones that come out in the future, like the Extreme AI Top from Gigabyte, that one, unfortunately, there is no public info on that. You can't order it. B&H, for some reason, has it listed, but there's no data on it, even Gigabyte's own documentation. So we're not going to be able to cover that one, but we are going to cover all the other ones that have all of their specifications published online, and the pricing info is either fully accurate or taken based off of the previous generation. So with that being said, there are a total of, I believe, 13 different motherboards. So the main thing, you want to look at the use case. How are you going to actually use the PC? Are you going to use all the PCIe expansion slots? Are you going to use all the M.2 drives, for example? Because some of these motherboards have lane sharing, others do not. We're going to go over that, and that is going to factor in alongside the price point and the other features where it ranks on this list. So to start off, we're going to start with Gigabyte's flagship, just right off the top. Gigabyte's Aorus Master. This one is going to be an A-tier motherboard. Unlike the previous generation, this motherboard now has lane sharing with the GPU, whereas the previous edition for X670E did not. So it's coming in at the same exact price point of the previous one, so it's $499. It is an 8-layer PCB, 5 gig LAN, so it does have an upgrade over the previous gen. Now we've got 5 gig LAN. It also added the clear CMOS on the back that was missing last time. 10 USB Type A's in addition to the USB 4. The USB 4 is standard on all of these boards. Optical audio. However, there's lane sharing, but on top of that, it does provide dual X4 PCIe slots. One is Gen 4, the other is Gen 3. So if you're somebody who wants to use like capture cards that are internal, 4K capture cards like the AverMedia Live Gamer 4K, for example, or the Elgato equivalent, this is probably a good choice if you're somebody who is doing media, specifically live streaming or that sort of thing. I feel like Gigabyte's motherboards, these Aorus motherboards, all seem like they're tailor fit for that sort of use case. You could use them for productivity, but there are better choices. So just keep that in mind. But at $500 effectively, this is a solid A choice overall. Next we have the Aorus Pro. So this one comes in either the Ice White Edition or the Black Edition. So this is going to actually be a B tier motherboard, mainly because it has a 6-layer PCB, which means that the electrical noise isolation is not going to be as good compared to some of the other ones. There are other motherboards that are in this same price point that offer 8-layer, which we will talk about later, and that's what ultimately pushes this one down the stack. However, compared to last generation, this one does have the postcode debug. In fact, all of these motherboards that are on this list have the postcode debug this time around compared to last time, except for one. There's one motherboard on this list that does not have the postcode, which is extremely disappointing considering its intended user base. So anyway, the Pro, it's a solid B tier, 6-layer PCB, 9 USB Type A's on the back, only 2.5 gig LAN, but they are going for that lower price point. However, there are similar price motherboards that offer 5 gig LAN. So ultimately, it's because of the competition, which is what drives the Aorus Pro down to the B. There is also lane sharing, just like the Aorus Master. So if you want to use your second and third SSD that are wired to the CPU that are Gen 5 capable, those will use lanes from the graphics card slot, so the graphics card will run at X8. This is a thing for all of these Aorus motherboards. Every single Aorus motherboard that we are showcasing here all have GPU lane sharing for 2 M.2 drives. Oh, and lastly, the other thing is there's no clear CMOS on the back. So, however, it does have the quick disconnect button for the GPU. All the Aorus boards have that, but only the Master has the clear CMOS. Next, we have the Aorus Elite. This is also going to be a B series motherboard. This one is a little bit lower priced than the Pro, so this one's coming in at like $320 or $319. It is a 6-layer board. It has 2.5 gig LAN, 10 USB Type A's, optical audio, dual X4 slots. All these Gigabyte Aorus boards have dual X4, so they're perfect for like if you want to record or stream gameplay on a PS5 Pro or an Xbox Series X. You could literally connect both consoles to 2 different capture cards on any of these Gigabyte boards, and they would work just fine. So that's the Gigabyte lineup. Let's move on now to ASUS. So ASUS, starting off with the Crosshair Hero. This is the ASUS flagship this generation for X870E. This one is going to be an S-tier motherboard, and there's a couple of reasons why. Probably the most important reason why this motherboard is in the S-tier class is because it has an asynchronous E-clock mode, which means if you are into overclocking, or even if you want to just copy someone who has overclocking guide to get better single-core and multi-core performance using the dual B-clock feature that this board has, that is one of the main reasons why it is S-tier. The other thing is it does have ASUS's NitroPath technology, which they're claiming can achieve up to 400 megahertz higher DDR5 speeds. So I myself have tested 4 sticks of DDR5 at 6,000 megatransfers on this board, and it works flawlessly. The other thing too is it has SlimSAS. SlimSAS is an enterprise technology that can allow you to use a U.2 NVMe drive, which we are going to have a video showcasing how that works. So that way you can do 4 M.2 drives with no lane sharing on the GPU. However, the Hero does offer lane sharing with the GPU if you want to add an additional 2 Gen 5 SSDs. So you can drive a total of 6 SSDs on this board. Otherwise, you can run 4 of them and still pull full 16 bandwidth to the GPU. Downsides of this board, probably the only thing is it does not have an X4 slot. It has an X8 slot that shares lanes with the GPU. Not everybody's going to use that. It is also expensive at $699, but it has a whole bunch of features like I mentioned. It has dual LAN, so it's 5 gig plus 2.5 gig. It's pretty much fully loaded in terms of connectivity options. So that's what makes it an S tier. Next we have the Strix. So the Strix is going to be an A tier board. Strix is very similar to the Gigabyte Aorus Master. It's the exact same price. It is an 8-layer PCB. It has very good heat sinks for the M.2 drives. It has 5 gig LAN, optical audio. Very, very similar in terms of its competitor, that being the Aorus Master. So unlike the Aorus Master, this one only has a single X4 slot, which is Gen 4, whereas the Aorus Master has an X4 Gen 4 and an X4 Gen 3. So this one is similar, like it could be used for kind of like a streamer type computer, but I think the Aorus Master is going to provide more variety of options for connectivity. So if I was building a streaming PC, I would probably go with the Master over the Strix, although both of them are very similar and they're also the exact same price. Next, we come to the ProArt. This is ASUS's third one. This one is also going to be an A tier board. I was going to put this in B tier because this is the only motherboard that does not have the postcode, and it is a $479 motherboard without a postcode. We have like $320 options from Gigabyte that include the postcode, and here we have ASUS trying to charge $479 for a motherboard that does not have the postcode. So I kind of want to put this in B tier. I'm kind of like, to me, it's a toss-up. Ultimately, I kind of want to put it in A tier. There's only 2 motherboards at launch that include 10 gig LAN. The ProArt is one of them, and it is much lower cost than the other one, which we'll talk about shortly. But because it has 10 gig LAN, because it also has DisplayPort input via the USB 4 controller, I can understand the use case as a productivity, almost like a workstation, although it's not a Threadripper motherboard. I sort of understand what ASUS is trying to do with this. I compared this with the Strix because they're very similar in price. This is actually a little bit cheaper at $20 less than the Strix, but the heat sinks are not as good. It does not have postcode. It's a toss-up in terms of like which one which one do I like more between these two. So ultimately, I'll leave it at A, but it's really weird that ASUS is nickel and diming on this board because they're giving you the 10 gig LAN, but they're not giving you a postcode. And I feel like someone who's building a workstation, they really want the debug tools. Otherwise, it doesn't seem like it fits, if you get what I'm saying. So anyway, we'll leave the ProArt at that. It does have a lot of features, dual LAN, 10 gig plus 2.5. It does not have optical audio, but it does have a dedicated line in. So I don't think this is for gaming. Like if you're doing a gaming build, I would not get this. And if you want to go with ASUS, I would get the Strix over the ProArt, unless you really want the 10 gig LAN for your home network. But I just think there's better options overall. It does have an X4 slot, and it also has an X8 slot. So it does have a lot of connectivity options. So just keep that in mind. 4 M.2 drives total, but 1 does share lanes with the GPU. So it does have lane sharing. So I kind of want to throw it down here. So next we're moving on to ASRock. So ASRock has probably the most interesting lineup out of all of these, because if you're somebody who absolutely does not want any of your GPU lanes to be shared with M.2 drives, all 3 of ASRock's motherboards got you covered, because none of these 3 motherboards steal lanes from the GPU to provide M.2 drives. So we'll start off with the Taichi. Taichi is going to be an S-tier board. The Taichi is an EATX motherboard, so it's got better cooling in terms of the heatsink surface area for heat dissipation. It's one of the few motherboards that still offers 6 SATA ports. ASRock Taichi has got you covered there. It has an X8 slot at the bottom, just like the Crosshair Hero, but this motherboard is coming in at $449, so it is $50 less than the Master and the Strix, and it is still coming in cheaper than the ProArt. Now, the one thing that it does not do is it does not have 10 gig LAN, where the ProArt does, but it does have the postcode. It does have the quick disconnect latch for the GPU, the clear CMOS on the back, EATX form factor. However, not everyone's case can fit an EATX board, so keep that in mind. But this one has an insane 24 plus 2 plus 1 overbuilt VRM. So this one has the most insane VRM. So if you're wanting to do overclocking and potentially the asynchronous B clock, if it does have that, that means it would be coming in at the lowest price point for that feature. No dual LAN and no X4 slot are probably the only downsides of it, but otherwise it is offering an insane amount of value at the price point. So ASRock has really outdone themselves with the Taichi this time. Next we have the Taichi Lite. So the Taichi Lite is going to be an A. People are probably going to be like, why is this in A tier when it's exactly the same as the Taichi? Well, there's a couple of things that the Taichi Lite does not have that the Taichi has, which is what basically drops it down a tier. In terms of the connectivity options, everything is the same. Where it lacks compared to the Taichi is going to be in quality of life. So this does not have the GPU quick disconnect. So if you're using a giant air cooler, like a Noctua D15 for example, you're going to have a really hard time removing the GPU if you're upgrading your GPU, because this thing doesn't have the quick disconnect, unlike the Taichi. However, it still has the postcode, it still has all the other stuff, it still has the same M.2s, it still does not have any lane sharing with the GPU, so you get full 16 dedicated lanes, so it has you covered there. So for $50 less, and no RGB, and no GPU disconnect, it falls into A tier. However, ASRock has a motherboard that goes way beyond the Taichi in terms of absolute value. So the next motherboard is going to be the Phantom Gaming X870E Nova Wi-Fi. This motherboard is the absolute winner of the pack. This is a 5 M.2 equipped motherboard that you can drive all 5 M.2 drives at full bandwidth while still maintaining 16 lanes to the GPU. None of these other motherboards on this list so far provide that, although there is going to be another one that does have that. So coming in at $349 is going to be an S Plus motherboard. This is what it means to go beyond. This motherboard comes in at $349. It is an 8-layer PCB, just like the Taichi. It has no GPU lane sharing. It provides 5 M.2 drives, and the GPU will still run at 16 lanes. However, it does not have an X4 slot, but it does have an X1 slot for like a sound card, and it has an X2 slot at the bottom that can be used for 10 gig LAN because it does not include 10 gig LAN, but it is $350 with 5 gig LAN. This is the reason why these other two boards from Gigabyte are in the B tier class, because this guy is $350, so he's basically the same price, if not a little bit cheaper than the Pro from Gigabyte, but it's 8-layer versus 6-layer, 5 gig LAN versus 2.5 gig LAN. There's just too much value. There's just way too much value. This motherboard is going to sell out really fast. I have never encountered a motherboard offering this much value. On top of that, the icing on the cake is going to be the fact that this Nova includes a backplate. This thing has a backplate coming in at $350, offering 5 M.2 drives, all the while providing full bandwidth to the GPU. I can't argue with that. No other motherboard can touch this board. This board is the absolute winner. Nothing comes close. It even has optical audio, and a clear CMOS on the back. It's a steal. Go out and buy this motherboard right now. Probably by the time this video is on YouTube, this motherboard is probably going to be sold out. Just saying, at $349, it's a steal of a deal. All right, moving on, we have Godlike from MSI. So MSI's Godlike is going to be an S-tier board. This board offers pretty much everything that you don't even know you would need. So this has a 10-layer PCB. This has the most layers out of all the boards, but it is extremely expensive. Tentatively, the price point on this is coming in at around $1,299. So this is over $1,000. So that's the reason why Nova is going to stay as the king, because the value is just way too good versus the Godlike. However, the Godlike also, like the Nova and the Taichi, there is no lane sharing for your graphics card, which means your graphics card always runs 16, just like the Nova and the Taichi, no matter how many SSDs you populate on the board, which it has 5, just like the Nova. So this got 5 M.2s, 2 of which are Gen 5, but what MSI has done, which is quite interesting, is instead of taking lanes from the GPU slot for an M.2, they're sharing lanes with the USB 4 controller and the second Gen 5 SSD. So that's how they're pulling that off. It's kind of a secret technique that MSI is doing. So this motherboard provides an X8 and an X4 at the bottom. MSI currently is the only motherboard vendor that supports CUDIM, which is CUDIM, the new DDR5 technology that will allow much higher speeds at lower voltages. So MSI has that support today. However, we won't see those CUDIM modules until next year. Asynchronous mode, just like the Hero, the Godlike has got you covered there if you want to overclock using B-Clock. It has a removable display with proprietary connectors. It is eATX, just like the Taichi. It is 10 gig plus 5 gig, so dual LAN. So it is the only other motherboard besides the ProArt which has 10 gig LAN. Smart button on the back, fully loaded I/O on the back, lots of USB-C, and the GPU disconnect button, as well as clear CMOS. So basically, it can do everything that the Nova can do, plus the ability to include an X8 slot and a dedicated X4. However, because this motherboard is so expensive, it cannot match the Nova in terms of the value that ASRock is providing. So that's why this one sits in the S tier class alongside the Hero and the Taichi. Next, we have the Carbon Wi-Fi. The Carbon Wi-Fi is a solid A tier board. This almost could be S, but when you look at this compared to the Taichi is providing slightly more value at a $50 less price point. So that means the Carbon, the Strix, and the Master sit at the $500 price point, whereas the Taichi is the closest competitor from ASRock, but it comes in at $50 less. Meanwhile, you have the Tai Chi Lite, which is even $100 less, but it has less quality of life things compared to the Carbon. So the Carbon has the GPU button, for example. It is still 8-layer. It provides an X4 slot, whereas this one is an X8 that shares lanes. This is a dedicated X4 slot, and it also provides the X8 slot. So dual LAN, 5 gig plus 2.5. More options than the Strix and the Tai Chi. However, it's still beat overall by the value that the Tai Chi is offering, coming in at $50 less. So that's where it sits at a solid A. So we have the NZXT N9 X870E. This one is also going to be a solid A tier board from NZXT. We don't have the exact pricing on this, but the assumption is that this is either going to be $499 or $449. So either price point is still going to come in the A tier. It has no GPU lane sharing, just like the ASRock motherboards. So if you're someone who really wants a motherboard that maintains 16 lanes on the GPU while populating all the M.2 drives, the NZXT is a solid choice. It is also 8-layer PCB, and it has an X2 slot at the bottom. So if you wanted to add a 10 gigabit network card, for example, you could put that down there. Optical audio and 10 USB Type A. So not a whole lot more to say. It is a solid choice. And then last but not least, we have Biostar with the X870E Valkyrie. This one's going to be B tier. Main reason why this is coming in at B tier is even though it has an X8 slot and an X4 slot, the X4 slot shares bandwidth with the 4th M.2. It does not have a quick disconnect button for the GPU. It does have a postcode at the bottom, but it only has 2.5 gig LAN, and it is going to be more expensive than the $300 to $350 Gigabyte options. It's a toss-up between the Gigabyte Elite and the Pro and the Valkyrie. So that's going to be it, guys. Overall, there are no terrible motherboards with this launch. I mean, there's no C or D. Like, all of them are going to be either S, A, or B, depending on the use case. Most of them are solid choices. I would say if you're going to aim for an A tier board, expect to spend around, $450 to $500. Otherwise, these B tier X870Es are still decent options. These 6 layers from Gigabyte aren't going to overclock the RAM that well because they don't have enough noise isolation compared to these other ones. So that's what separates them from the Aorus Master. So anyway, that's going to be it for this video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And if you're doing a new build and you like this content, do subscribe to the channel. It does motivate me to keep making these sort of technical videos. So as always, guys, I'll catch you next time, and take care.